On October 20th, 1977, a chartered Convair CV-240 aircraft carrying the southern rock band Lynyrd Skynyrd crashed in a wooded area near Gillsburg, Mississippi. The crash claimed 6 lives, including lead singer Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, backup vocalist Cassie Gaines, assistant road manager Dean Kilpatrick, and both pilots. 20 other passengers aboard survived, though many were seriously injured. The tragedy shook the music world and marked a devastating chapter in the history of rock and roll, permanently altering the course of one of the genre's most iconic bands. The band had been on tour promoting their 5th studio album, Street Survivors, which had just been released 3 days prior. The album featured songs that would become some of their most famous, including That Smell and What's Your Name. Ironically, the album cover depicted the band surrounded by flames, which would later be pulled from shelves after the crash, and replaced with a more subdued image. The tour was scheduled to take them from Greenville, South Carolina, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they were set to perform their next show. Despite concerns about the aircraft, a 1940s-era Convair CV-240, the band boarded for what would tragically be their final flight together in its original form. The Convair CV-240, registered as N55VM, was a twin-engine, propeller-driven aircraft that had seen many years of service. At the time of the crash, the aircraft was owned by L&J Company and had been leased for the band's tour. Several band members and crew had previously expressed misgivings about the plane's condition. Reports of malfunctioning instruments, visible oil leaks, and an overall sense of unreliability had created growing unease among those flying on it. Cassie Gaines had reportedly stated her preference for traveling in the band's tour bus rather than flying, a decision that was overruled in favor of convenience and scheduling. The flight took off from Greenville in the late afternoon. Roughly 2.5 hours into the journey, while cruising at an altitude of about 12,000 feet, the aircraft began to experience engine trouble. Initial indications suggest the right engine began sputtering, followed closely by problems with the left. The pilots, Walter McCreary and William Gray, were faced with a dire emergency. Both engines had failed, leaving the aircraft gliding and rapidly descending with no power. The terrain below was dense with trees and marshland, offering few options. For a safe emergency landing, the pilots radioed their distress and attempted to guide the aircraft toward a clearing. But the situation quickly deteriorated. With limited altitude and power, and with nightfall approaching, visibility was minimal. The plane clipped the tops of trees before plummeting into a heavily forested area. The fuselage split upon impact, scattering passengers and debris across the crash site. The force of the impact killed 6 people instantly or within moments, including band members Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines. Other passengers were trapped in the wreckage, suffering from broken bones, lacerations, internal injuries, and shock. Several survivors later recounted the eerie silence after the crash, interrupted only by the cries of the injured and the distant sound of approaching rescue efforts. Local residents, alerted by the sound of the crash, rushed to the scene to help. Emergency responders arrived soon after, but the remote location and thick woods made access difficult. Rescuers used makeshift stretchers and flashlights to locate and assist survivors. The injured were transported to nearby hospitals, some undergoing emergency surgeries and intensive care. The surviving members of the band and crew were left physically and emotionally shattered. Drummer Artemis Pyle, who had survived the crash, with broken ribs and cuts, famously crawled from the wreckage and ran to find help, ultimately alerting locals and guiding rescue personnel to the scene. In the days following the crash, the music world was left in shock. Fans across the country mourned the loss of Ronnie Van Zant, whose gritty voice and songwriting had defined Lynyrd Skynyrd's sound. The loss of the Gaines siblings added to the heartbreak, especially considering their relatively recent addition to the band. The media coverage was extensive, and memorial services were held for the deceased. The band's management faced questions about the choice of aircraft, and investigators began piecing together the causes of the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched a full investigation into the crash. Initial findings suggested that the aircraft had run out of fuel, a conclusion that stunned many. Analysis revealed that the aircraft's fuel gauges were faulty, leading the pilots to believe they had more fuel than was actually on board. Compounding the problem was a lack of thorough pre-flight inspections and miscommunications between the flight crew and ground support. It was also noted that the aircraft had a history of maintenance issues, and its suitability for long-range charter flights was called into question. The NTSB ultimately concluded that fuel exhaustion caused by crew inattention to fuel supply was the primary cause of the crash. The accident underscored the importance of rigorous maintenance standards and proper fuel management, leading to changes in regulations and practices for chartered aircraft. In the aftermath, families of the deceased and injured filed lawsuits against the charter company and others associated with the aircraft's operation. Settlements were reached in the years that followed, and the tragedy prompted a broader discussion about safety in the music touring industry. For Lynyrd Skynyrd, the crash marked the end of an era. The surviving band members were left with deep physical and emotional scars. Bassist Leon Wilkeson sustained severe injuries and nearly lost an arm. Guitarist Gary Rossington suffered multiple fractures. Despite their trauma, some members eventually reunited years later to revive the band's music and legacy. In 1987, the band reformed, with Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother Johnny Van Zant stepping in as lead vocalist. The new lineup honored the memory of the fallen while introducing a new generation to their music. The legacy of Lynyrd Skynyrd endures not just because of their music, but because of the resilience shown in the face of tragedy. Songs like Free, Bird and Sweet Home Alabama became anthems of Southern rock, deeply rooted in American musical culture. Tributes to the fallen members continue to be made at concerts, memorials, and fan gatherings. In Gillsburg, a memorial was erected at the crash site, honoring those who lost their lives. It has become a place of pilgrimage for fans, a somber, yet celebratory reminder of the impact the band had on generations of listeners. The story of the crash is more than a rock and roll tragedy. It is a story of lives lost too soon, of survival against the odds, and of a band whose spirit refused to die. The emotional weight of that day in 1977 still resonates, captured in documentaries, books, and interviews with those who lived through it. For those who survived, the crash was a defining moment that shaped the rest of their lives. Many have spoken publicly about their experiences, offering first-hand accounts of the chaos, pain, and courage witnessed in the Mississippi woods. While the music industry has seen other tragedies, the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash stands apart because of the fame and cultural importance of those involved, the dramatic circumstances of the crash, and the enduring popularity of their music. It is a story passed down through generations, a cautionary tale wrapped in the chords of Southern rock, and even as time moves forward, the memory of October 20th, 1977 remains suspended in the hearts of fans and musicians alike. A moment when the music was nearly silenced, only to rise again through the voices of those who refused to let it die. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with others and subscribe for more journeys into music and history that shaped the world.